Hi, welcome to my channel and The Art of Crime, the podcast, vlog, whatever you want to call it, where I talk about all things art and crime related and the crossover. And today I'm going to be talking to you about Richard Dadd. Richard Dadd was born in Chatham, Kent on 1st of August 1817. He was born to his parents, Robert and Mary Dodd. He attended school at the King's School in Rochester, which is said to be the second longest continuously running school in the world, so pretty much one of the oldest schools ever in existence, and that's because it is continuously operated from the date that it's opened. From an early age, Richard's art capabilities and his skill were completely apparent, so much so he was given admittance to the Royal Academy of the Arts, which is a fantastic thing to achieve at his age. He was actually so good at his craft that in 1840 he was awarded the medal for life drawing. It was a prestigious award back then, and we're talking the Victorian era at this point. Around the 1830s, Richard actually teamed up with a few fellow artists to form what was called the Clique at the time. I'm not sure if this is where the clique actually comes from when you're talking about a group of people. It just seems that it's very apt for when you're talking about a specific group of people. But this was actually what they called themselves, and there was a fair few artists actually involved in this. I've got a list of them, but I can't remember their names off the top of my head, so I'm going to read them from my notes. Edward Matthew Ward, John Phillip, Henry Nelson O'Neill, William Powell, Alfred Elmore and Augustus Egg to form the Clique. That is the group of men that actually formed this artist's clique. And effectively the clique was actually just a sketching group where all of these artists got together and drew a particular item from a subject that was decided upon amongst the group, and then what they would do is actually invite non-artists in to form a critique on it, to say whose was the best and why. Pretty much like the X Factor, but in reverse. So you've got the people who know what they're talking about actually performing for those who don't know what they're talking about, if that makes sense. I don't know whether that's a really rubbish analogy, but hey, I'm going with it. Of all the artists that were actually involved with the clique though, Richard was seen as the forefront, the main runner, so to speak, in the group of men that were there. In his capabilities and his work that he actually created, he was seen as the person that was the one to be as good at amongst the men that were involved in it. Richard's work became that renowned at that point that in 1842 the former mayor of Newport, that Sir Thomas Phillips, I want to say, apologies if I've got that wrong, that Sir Thomas Phillips actually invited him along with him to be a draftsman. So a draftsman is basically someone who draws technical or very detailed drawings, and he wanted Richard to come along with him to do this on his tour that he was going to be doing across Europe and further afield. And of course it was Victorian times, it wasn't actually that easy to travel, so Richard jumped at the chance. The trek actually went quite a few different countries. It travelled across the whole of Europe. It went through Greece, Turkey, southern Syria, to the point where it actually ended up in Egypt. And it was on this trip that Richard began to change, so to speak. Towards the last leg of their trip, as they were heading towards, well, they were actually in Egypt, they were heading up the Nile, this was when he actually became very changed, so to speak. He basically began to act very differently. He became more aggressive, a bit standoffish, and he just wasn't himself. And so what they decided amongst themselves is that he was probably suffering from sunstroke. Let's face it, if you've ever suffered from sunstroke, it can be something that can make you act irrationally, dehydrated, especially if you've got dehydration. But that, amongst everything else, they just put it down to that, and they thought, well, we're at the end of the tour, we may as well just make our way back to the UK and we'll sort him out when we get home. When he returned to the UK, he was actually still not well in himself. He was still acting delusional and irrational and aggressively. He was actually diagnosed at that point as not being of sound mind. Now, back in Victorian eras, their diagnoses for mental health and things like that were nothing compared to what they are today. I mean, today we still have a lot of way to go when it comes to mental health, but if you're thinking back then, it really wasn't great at all. And because it wasn't that great at all. The only sort of treatment that you would get back then if you were mentally ill, which was a big blanket thing for anything that basically said you were not sound of mind, was insane asylums. That was pretty much all there ever was, insane asylums. Now, because of this, his family didn't want that, so they decided to take him home and get him to recoup at home with them in the countryside. They lived in a beautiful area, so they decided to take him back home. Now, the area that his family lived in at the time was a place called Cobham in Kent. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, apologies if I'm not, but it's a quaint little countryside village in Kent, and it was surrounded by beautiful fields, and it was a perfect place for someone to rest and recoup. It's one of these places where you think, actually, if I want to get out and relax, or even just get a little breakaway, some people find that just taking a stroll in the countryside really, really makes them feel better. So his family obviously thought it's a perfect place for him to recoup from this not sound mind diagnosis. So they went on many walks around the area with Richard. Different family members took him on walks, and it was a regular occurrence. They did it probably daily from the sounds of it. On one particular evening on July 28th, and this was in 1843, Richard and his father actually went for a stroll around one of the parks that surrounds Cobham, and they were walking around as they do, and they came to a circle of trees. Now, this circle of trees was a huge circle of elm trees, and it was at this point that they got there that 26-year-old Richard actually punched his dad. And when I say punched, I mean aggressively and repeatedly. Now, obviously, his father fought back to protect himself in this instance, and unfortunately for Robert, his father, Richard actually had a razor on him and began slashing at his father's throat. And of course, his father continued to fight, and he wasn't giving up without a fight. Unfortunately, again, for Robert, Richard also had a rigger knife on him, which was a 5-inch rigger knife, and then he began to stab his father in the chest. When his father finally succumbed to his injuries, he basically tidied up the scene, tidied up his father's body, and fled. Now, Richard made his way to Dover, where he boarded a boat over to France, and he made his way down to Paris. And it was at Paris he decided he was going to flee further south than here. Obviously, back then, things were not spread around as quickly as they are these days, and they probably didn't even know that his father was dead at this point. That I'm not 100% certain of. I can just guess at that being true. But he made his way to Paris, and from Paris he decided to get a coach down further south. And it was on this coach that he actually attacked another passenger, pretty much exactly the same way he did his father. So he used the same razor that what we can assume was the same razor that he had killed his father with, and began slashing at this other passenger that was in the coach. Now, understandably, Richard's actions shocked everyone. It wasn't expected. They knew he wasn't of sound mind, however, they didn't realise how not of sound mind he actually was, which was quite a shock to everyone that knew him, because they all weren't not expecting it, because the snap was so sudden. But when he was arrested by police, he was obviously questioned on what happened, and at the point that he admitted to killing his father, he said words that actually shocked everyone around him, including the police officers that were interrogating him. When asked why he did what he did, his response actually shocked everyone, and he basically said that he was doing what he was doing because the Egyptian goddess Osiris had told him to. It's a bit strange, isn't it, that when he had the break whilst he was away in Egypt, that's when he had the first, what we can only assume was a psychotic break. Now, because, as I said, diagnosis back then was completely different, but I find that ever so surreal that he had this break in Egypt, and it was the god Osiris that was telling him to attack these people, which I find really scary, if I'm honest. He also said something else, which I'm going to read word for word because it was a quote from the interrogation that he had that was actually stored on file. And he basically said that he was the son and envoy of God, sent to exterminate men most possessed with the demon. Richard killed his father because he was convinced his father was possessed by a demon. The devil himself, in fact. After his confession, he was sent back to England, where he was diagnosed as a criminal lunatic. I don't like the words that they use, but obviously, like I say, Victorian era was very, very different back then to how they would be diagnosed now. And the only treatment, as I said earlier on, for any lunatic at that point was to be sent to an insane asylum or an insane hospital. And the one that he was sent to originally was the St Mary's of Bethlehem Hospital, also known as, or also more commonly known as, Bedlam. That's right. Now, I don't know whether this is true or whether I'm just making another tedious link, but whenever my parents used to say to me, when me and my sister were creating chaos, and they would say, "This is utter bedlam," I did not realise that that was actually the name of an insane asylum. So maybe that's why the name actually exists. So yeah, that's where the only place I can assume that that actual saying comes from, the bedlam saying, is that you're acting like you're in an insane asylum. So thanks, Mum and Dad. Richard was actually held at the St Mary's Hospital, or Bedlam, up until 1864, where he was actually transferred at that point to the newly built Broadmoor Hospital. I'm going to pop in a couple of images that I've found from Broadmoor at the time, and to what you may, because like I say, insane asylums or lunatic asylums, whatever they wanted to call them at the point, they were actually very different to how people were treated these days. But I thought I would insert a couple of images. They're drawn images of what I've found that are readily available across the internet. I just found them really interesting to look at when I was doing my research. I thought they were really, really eye-opening, and definitely worth a look. So hopefully that's a bit of an eye-opener for you as to so that you can picture basically what Richard actually took part in or was involved in whilst he was there. As well as that though, whilst he was incarcerated, which I actually think this is brilliant, he was encouraged to continue painting, and I completely understand this in regards to helping someone when they're mentally unwell, because I wholeheartedly believe that crafts, and particularly art and painting for myself, are absolutely fantastic for mental health, and they are a great coping mechanism in some instances, especially myself. I suffered quite a lot when my first son was born, which is where Hodgepodge actually came from. That's where Hodgepodge was born. I started throwing myself back into craft because I wasn't coping extremely well when he was born. So I can completely empathise and understand where that all comes from, to make sure they're encouraging or actively encouraging Richard to paint. His paintings were actually phenomenal. Some of them are absolutely breathtaking, and one of them was actually of his doctor. It was so good, and it was actually moved from Broadmoor, and it's now stands in the Scottish National Portrait Gallery, which is phenomenal in itself, but the picture is exquisite. I will try and find a picture for you. And as an artist, the majority, because obviously Richard was incarcerated at the age of 26, the majority of his well-known artworks were all actually painted in Broadmoor. So if you don't know the artist's backstory, you wouldn't realise who has actually painted these exquisite paintings. He actually created a 33 picture watercolour series, and it's beautiful. I'm going to show a few up again on the screen right now. And these 33 watercolours were called Sketches to Illustrate the Passions. They featured passions such as pride, hatred, grief, even murder, and each of the characters in these 33 pieces, they have these fixated stares that are haunting is the best way I can probably describe them. They're just constantly staring off at one fixed point, and you just can't fathom out what it is they're staring at. I kind of almost feel that this is how he sees himself within these portraits. I think that's my self-interpretation of his artwork, having now researched his background. Before, I would have just seen these beautiful pictures and someone personifying a particular item, such as hatred or murder in his instance. But it kind of makes me now feel that actually maybe it's a little bit more at home with what Richard was painting, and he's definitely putting himself in there. That's just my personal opinion, though. I'm not an art critic. That's just my interpretation of the painting, which is fabulous because there's so many different interpretations that someone can have from any one painting, regardless of what the artist's own interpretation of that was. He also painted many landscapes, many shipping and pictures as well, of seascapes, that type of thing. And I don't think there's any pictures of his that I've seen so far that I don't like, and it's scary to think that these utter beauties of paintings and exquisite paintings have come from someone who has completed an utterly brutal crime. It's ever so scary that you can get two things. I mean, there's good in everyone, isn't there? Regardless of what you think of someone, they may still be good at something. We can't really take that away from them, but it is still a scary thing to think that these hands that painted these exquisite paintings actually resulted in someone's death. After many, many years at Broadmoor, Richard fell ill to what was described as extreme disease of the lungs, and again, diagnosis back then, it could have been anything from lung cancer to something completely different. Their diagnosis skills at that point were nothing compared to what they are today, so we may not ever know what it was that actually killed it. I couldn't pinpoint a specific ailment that killed him in the end, but it was this extreme disease in his lungs that ultimately resulted in his death on the 7th of January, and this was in 1886. Now, you may not have heard of Richard Dadd. I mean, I didn't hear of him until I actually started researching the artist in crime crossover, and his name jumped out at me because of him being a British artist, and I love researching ones that are closer to home because it kind of gives you that extra connection with it, because I may have potentially seen one of his paintings, which I'm almost certain I have in the Tate Modern, but I was so young at that time I can't fully remember. But it's nice to think actually I can relate to it because I've physically seen it. I will obviously cover more cases further afield, particularly looking at one in America at the moment, but I digress. So yeah, I think it's definitely one that probably isn't, the name's not renowned, it's not household from where I'm from anyway. At least it could be different in different areas of the UK. It's not like a Picasso or a Monet, but you probably may actually have heard of him without even realising it. So you may have heard a song by a particular band written by the one and only Freddie Mercury. Now this song was called The Fairy Fella's Masterstroke, which was written by, like I say, none other than Freddie Mercury, and it was actually Richard that inspired this song because Freddie Mercury saw his painting at the Tate Museum, and it actually inspired a song which is phenomenal, which many people know Queen. I'll be very, very shocked if you haven't heard of Queen and Freddie Mercury and his amazing talents. As well as that, which I found fascinating, that one of his paintings was actually found on the Antiques Roadshow. Now, for those of you, I don't know if the Antiques Roadshow features in different countries, but it's definitely firm traditional favourite, I think, in the UK. And it's basically a roadshow that travels around the UK, encouraging people to get up in their lofts, check out their old dusty bits in their rooms and bring them along and see if they're worth any money. And someone actually bought a painting along to the Antiques Roadshow, I forget where it was now, and it was a long lost Richard Dadd painting. And this actually sold to the British Museum for over, I think it was around £100,000, which the person who found that in their attic, wow. Kind of wish I could go and look up in my attic and find that sort of money sitting around. So yeah, you may have actually seen it on the Antiques Roadshow. It featured in 1987, so it was a while ago. It was a year before I was born, so I definitely haven't seen it, but I was going to try and Google a clip, but I couldn't find any long lost ones from that year. Like I say, I think Richard has created many pieces of artwork, and he's created hundreds. I particularly like the 33 illustrations of passion. I really love some of those, but I think my all-time favourite of his pieces has to be the Titiana sleeping. I think, again, it's exquisite. It's the detail, and I love Midsummer's Night's Dream anyway, so I think it just adds to that, and it really helps you picture A Midsummer's Night's Dream. And it's just the crossover, it's absolutely beautiful. And again, she's flawless, absolutely flawless in that picture. I think it's definitely one of my firm favourites. But yeah, so it's a much quicker story for you today. Apologies, because of it being such a old story, there's not many records. To be fair, I'm actually quite shocked I found as much as I did about his father's actual death. I'm quite proud that I managed to find the cause of death and everything, because I didn't think I would find that. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. It's one I've actually really enjoyed reading about and learning about, and now I'm actually going to be on the lookout for when I can go and physically see. I'm really missing going out, and I haven't been to an art gallery in years. I'm desperate to get back. I really am. I kind of wish I'd gone in London when I went to London last, but I will definitely be on the lookout now for some of Richard Dad's, because to see one of those in real life, I think, will be utterly amazing. I think it's definitely one I want to see, so be on the lookout. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. I hope you're enjoying the content. I had some lovely comments on the Oliveri case. Apologies, I'm still getting the name wrong. I really should have checked it. I hope you've enjoyed this case. I hope it's one that you've probably not heard of, with it being a murder/crime. I'm trying to find those crimes that people haven't really spoken about on YouTube, to bring you something fresh. So hopefully it's working for you. If it is that you would like to support the channel, please feel free to drop us a coffee. I'll pop the link in the description box below. Follow us on all the social medias. We're at Handmade by Hodgepodge everywhere. Hodgepodge.co.uk for the website. If you would like to see what I'm up to, please feel free to check out our socials. I've created a few new paintings this last couple of weeks. I probably should have said that at the start. I am an artist. That's the reason I do this, because I love finding out about other artists and getting inspiration from other places. So yeah, I really hope you've enjoyed it, guys, and I shall see you again next week. Bye, guys.